Let me just start off by saying that the moment that I walked out of the store with this action figure in hand, I actually thought I was going to be ambushed or arrested. Maybe a SWAT team was going to descend upon me, or maybe McFarlane was going to like glide in from a tree somewhere and just choke me to death with his big giant wrapper chain. And you might be wondering, well, why would you assume this, or why would this be your first thought leaving the store? Well, it's because I was able to find this figure for just an absolutely ridiculous price. If I'm not mistaken, this figure originally was supposed to be going for like around $39.99 at retail, if I remember correctly, but I was able to find him for $7.99. So I was able to pay under $9 for this action figure. It's crazy, it's mind-blowing, and honestly, if you're able to find it for this price point, definitely pick it up. I picked it up at my local Ross, which is not a store that I frequent too often, but every 2 or 3 weeks I'll probably stop by a couple just to see if they have any crazy deals for figures. Maybe sometimes I'm interested in their accessories or for custom fodder, or I'm just interested in the character itself, as is the case with this particular version of Gorilla Grodd. And don't ask me what particular comic book series this particular Gorilla Grodd is based upon, because I have no idea. I don't really remember Gorilla Grodd ever looking like this, at least from the TV appearances or any of the comic book appearances or even the video game appearances that I remember. I don't remember him ever having ugly, like really bright orange armor, but it is what it is. For $9, I'll definitely pick up this figure. It will definitely stand out on the display. So what are my thoughts on the figure? I have to start off with the shading, the paint work, the sculpt work, because all of that is really well done. I think this is one of those few figures that McFarlane kind of nails in some areas, but falls a little bit short in others. And I'm not sure if this is 100% his fault or it's just the source material. But overall, the sculpt work, I think he did a phenomenal job. The figure has a lot of seamless cuts, especially around the joints. You can't really see them too well, and I think that's really what you want if you're a big action figure collector. The other big thing, obviously, is that wash that's all over the hair or the fur of Gorilla Grodd. I really love it. Accentuates the details on this figure, and I think they did a phenomenal job with it. Now, could they have done that with other pieces, like maybe the armor pieces? I'm not sure. I don't really know if it's supposed to be like really bright crossguard orange, or if there's supposed to be a little bit of grayness in there. I'm not too sure, but personally, I didn't love the bright orange armor pieces all over the body. But the shade work is just really well done. The sculpt work, I love the head sculpt as well. This is something that not a lot of people have brought up, or at least some of the videos that I saw. But the head sculpt is done absolutely brilliantly. There is, or I should say, there are 2 different ball joints in there, and so it really facilitates the movement of the head sculpt. But not only that, it's the way that the head was actually designed. So the top portion, you can't really see any difference, but if you actually lift the head, there's kind of like a curvature to the head. So they could have easily messed up and just made a big giant bulky head that has a very limited range and very limited articulation. But instead, McFarlane did something that's like I said, really genius, which is to cut that head sculpt on the inside. So it's kind of like curved towards the inside of the body. That way you're allowed even bigger movement, more tilt. He can look side to side way more than I thought that he was going to be able to originally. But this is a McFarlane figure after all, and you always know that whenever a figure is right down the line and McFarlane has to choose between aesthetics and functionality, he's always going to go with the aesthetics. I know there was an interview not too long ago where he kind of got into a little bit of a rant where he felt like it was more important to be artistic than to make highly articulated figures, and you can definitely tell here, although I've never understood why, if McFarlane thought that it was more about artistic integrity, why he would choose to jump into action figures and not stick with statues or other forms of art like comic books. When you're talking about action figures need to articulate. They need to be able to pose and articulate, and that's something that this figure definitely falls short in. You do notice that there's a giant ball joint at the mid torso, which allows a little bit of forward and backward ab crunch, and then single jointed elbows, single jointed knees. Aside from that, and then obviously the shoulder can lift up pretty well for a big hefty figure. Aside from that, the figure just has a bunch of issues in terms of articulation. I would have loved a double jointed elbow and knee, and then some more cuts in the upper arm as well as the upper leg. If you're going to limit articulation in other points, at least have those thigh cuts and those arm cuts. That way they can get into at least a variation of poses. It seems like he's only able to get in like 1 or 2 different poses. Everybody around the display is going to be able to get into some pretty iconic poses, but Gorilla Grodd isn't really going to be able to do much. It's more of just a semi-articulated statue, and I understand why the figure ended up going to clearance. I don't know if it's worth the $40. I think in terms of sculpt work, paint job, and just the overall girth and size of the figure, it definitely is. But in terms of the functionality and the engineering that went into this figure, I think it was a little bit lazy. It just falls a little bit short. And I know there's going to be a lot of people in the comment section that maybe say, well, it's a big hefty figure, what do you expect? You know, it's probably well over 9 inches. It's going to run into problems in terms of articulation and posing, and I completely understand that. But there have been some phenomenal figures from other OMs that have released some really big hefty figures, and still they don't sacrifice the articulation just for the aesthetics of the figure. And I think that's a big issue that McFarlane has run into. Another big thing to mention is that the ankles, from what I can tell, it looks like they're only on a hinge. There's no rocker in there. You can't move the ankles back and forth. You can only move them forward and backwards, not side to side. So again, it's going to really limit your posability with this figure, and that's just one of the many issues that the figure has. Now, having said all of that, it's still a phenomenal figure. It has some issues, it has some downsides to it, but as soon as I bought the figure, I picked it up. I knew exactly what I was getting myself into. I knew exactly what McFarlane is all about. And so having that mindset and that preconceived notion of what type of figures he makes with this type of size, what type of articulation I was going to get, I think that really helped out to kind of soften the blow. Honestly, I don't like giving scores to figures, but if I were to give it one, I'd probably say it's like a low 8 or like a very, very high 7. Now, for the price point, to me, it's like a 100% cop. If you're able to find this for like under $20, I think you have to pick it up. Even at the $30 price point, I would still suggest it. It looks great in the display, and I think Gorilla Grodd is one of those few Flash villains that definitely need some representation in your display. It's definitely not a perfect figure. It has its shortcomings. But as I said, if you know exactly the type of collectibles that McFarlane works on, you'll know exactly what to expect here. Now, as always, this is just my personal opinion, my personal take. I'm always very curious to see what you guys have to say. Let me know down below in the comment section. Did you guys pick up any of these figures from this wave? Did you guys pick up this particular figure? What did you think of it? I'm very curious to see the rest of this wave, just because I do assume that these are eventually going to hit the clearance stores and a lot of these discount aisles, just because we already saw this figure and this was kind of like the heavy hitter of the wave. So I assume the rest of the wave is going to be arriving soon. So definitely keep an eye out. And if I do happen to run into any more of these, I will definitely unbox them and give you guys my quick take, a little review, if you will. So stay safe out there, enjoy the hobby, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you.